Right, so the SNP have tabled a motion to be voted on next Wednesday, calling for a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza, and vote to take a position of calling for that formally, adopting that as the UK government position on this matter. Keir Starmer, that Zionist without qualification, ardently sticking to his pro-Israel narrative, vehemently opposed to a ceasefire in favour of humanitarian pauses where aid is allowed in as long as it can be bombed again straight afterwards, isn't just whipping his MPs to abstain on this vote. He's whipping them to vote against it, which will effectively mean voting with the Tories to block this motion. But his reasoning behind this is the most cowardly, craven and self-serving position he could possibly take, because he's saying he'd rather vote with the Tories than the SNP, because it would harm Labour's electoral position in Scotland. He's choosing to weaponise Scotland to oppose a Gaza ceasefire and save lives. How much more sick can this man get? Right, so the Scottish vote the twisted Starmer thinks he's on his uppers in Scotland over, presumably based off the back of his victory in Rutherglen and Hamilton West recently, that by-election. But his position of abject opposition to a ceasefire has put him at odds with Scottish Labour. And as much as Labour in Scotland are regarded as little more than a branch office for Westminster, the Scottish Labour leader, Anna Sarwar, despite being a Starmerite sort of a chap, has publicly called for a ceasefire. He's completely at odds with Starmer's position on this. So how will he react, I wonder, to Starmer suddenly weaponising Scotland in order to see off a motion brought by the Scottish National Party? As the third party in Westminster, the SNP are allowed to table motions themselves on just 3 days of the year. They do not get a lot of say. And they've chosen to use one of them for this. A motion calling for a ceasefire, not only in line with the feelings of the people of Scotland, but the majority of people in the UK as a whole, 3/4 of whom want a ceasefire, but that view being woefully underrepresented and ignored by those elected to office. Starmer has already faced significant opposition from within his own party over his stance, and he's still refusing to budge an inch on it. Whatever he wants is what goes. And too bad if Labour members or MPs still think their party is a democratic institution, because it isn't. It's now ruled by diktat, and what Starmer wants, Starmer gets. But he's got away with that viewpoint for long enough. Something's had to give, got to give, especially on something like this. He's lost upwards of 48 councillors nationwide, lost majority control of one council, lost complete control of another, lost vast swathes of the Muslim vote in this country, which has typically been a Labour vote, and had one of his frontbench MPs resign. But he's also being warned he could be looking at another 10 frontbench resignations if he insists on pushing ahead with this. He's made signing Richard Bergen's reposted early day motion calling for a ceasefire a sacking offence for the front bench now, which triggered the resignation of that one front bencher, Imran Hussain. But more will likely follow if forced to vote against something they put their name to supporting previously. 18 front bench Labour MPs signed Bergen's first EDM before the King's Speech wiped it out, which is why he's reposted it now. 17 of them, shamefully, have so far resisted signing the EDM again, but actually formally voting against it, well, that's got to be another matter, surely. That's something they'd need to justify to their constituents, who, after all, are supposed to be served first and foremost. And going up to them and saying, well, I wanted to save my shadow ministerial backside instead, well, that won't go down well, will it? So Starmer has deployed the whips to carry out his instructions to his MPs. But the excuse they've been given in order to push this vote against a ceasefire is Labour's position in Scotland. Nothing to do with Israel, nothing to do with Gaza. The SNP must be opposed because really it is all about Scotland, you see. The whips are reportedly telling MPs that to vote against their party position on this, to vote with the SNP, to vote for a ceasefire would totally undermine Labour's position in Scotland, and that if Labour were in government, they would have to vote against their own government in order to do this. Well, Labour are not in government for one. They're supposed to be opposing the government instead of supporting them, as they are here, choosing instead to oppose another opposition party because of Starmer's position. And that's all it comes down to, because Starmer is obsessed with taking seats off the SNP, and he's obsessed with backing up Israel. I'm not convinced the people of Scotland, who are amongst the most politically aware and astute voters in this country, I feel. They tend to be far better informed than average. I can't say I'm convinced that voting against a ceasefire for more bombing and more killing of innocent civilians, including so many children, is going to be a vote winner amongst them. I don't know why it's a vote winner for anyone, but then the stupid poll lead Labour still has just shows the get the Tories out mentality is still winning out, even if politically nothing will change. A lot of Labour voters in waiting are going to be very angry that nothing changes after next year's likely general election, but seemingly so many cannot be told. course, it isn't Labour in Scotland at all, because this has been Starmer's position from the beginning. This merely shows how shameless he is in trying to concoct some kind of a rational argument for his actions, which are sociopathic, completely insane, compassionless nonsense. There is no sane argument at all for not calling for a ceasefire, because all conflicts end with the calling of one, followed by negotiation and the permanent cessation of hostilities. Peace. That Starmer and Sunak too will not call for. One is because they've chosen a side, and it is the side of the aggressor, of the occupier, who they would rather see win, which, looking at things, means genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip rather than peace. The SNP are absolutely right in this and have the numbers in Parliament to bring this motion, push this motion. If only we could vote for them all, eh? If only all of us could vote for them. But thankfully in England, we have the Green Party as our pro-ceasefire option. We do have an option here. It's the only party worth a vote right now for the majority of us. Wales have Plaid Cymru too as an option. Forcing this vote in one direction is going to cause Keir Starmer problems, especially if a significant number of his party defy him on this. He will look weak because of it. He will look both weak and dictatorial if he carries out mass sackings and suspensions over it, because people have voted with their conscience just because he doesn't have one. But I totally believe that is what will happen, because keeping his donors depends on it. Of course, it isn't just me calling him out. Many others are too. Amr Anwar, the defence solicitor who worked with bereaved COVID families in Scotland, weighed in on this. He said, "You say the choice on Wednesday is to stick together or support the SNP over the Labour Party and undermine our party in Scotland. No, Keir Starmer, the choice is to do the right thing and vote for a ceasefire, not to order your MPs not to vote for a ceasefire." Labour National Executive Committee member Mish Rahman said 76% of the British public back a ceasefire. Sunak and Starmer need to align with the will of the majority of the British public. Labour whips using Scotland as an excuse is ridiculous. Scottish Labour leader Sarwar has already called for a ceasefire. Scottish voter Elaine McGurk said, "Why will some Scots vote for Labour? This is playing with lives in Palestine. Voting down a ceasefire motion just because the SNP are bringing it in. How heartless can Labour get? Starmer deserves to be fired by their party. Party before human life is not a good look." SNP leader Humza Yousaf, whose in-laws are still trapped in Gaza. If we're going to talk about hostage taking, what about the people Israel won't let leave who aren't from there? Well, he said, 30 days of bombing, over 10,000 dead, including 4,000 children. If you are not calling for an immediate ceasefire, you are frankly enabling the suffering of so many innocent people. Scotland will be on the right side of history and of humanity. I agree completely, and fair play to him for rising above Starmer's level, but only by sticking by the SNP right now and telling Starmer to do one, just as the people of Scotland have done historically in these last several years. To still do that now, as they side with the Tories, well, the people of Scotland need to do with Starmer what they do with any other Tory: vote him out. Starmer's position is ridiculous. A problem is members of his party have said that he has created all on his own for no real gain, no proper reason. There's no point to this. It's just his ideological obsession with supporting Israel, which by his actions in recent weeks he will do no matter what they do. Backing a Starmer-led Labour is backing an Israel-run Labour in effect. But to now hide behind Scotland as his reasoning for opposing a ceasefire motion shows he's running out of both time and excuses. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Imran Hussein's resignation may just be a flavour of what Starmer is in for next week, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.